Hello, and welcome to Dig It. I'm Peter Brown, and hosting the show with me today is Chris Day. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Peter.
So, on the show today, we're talking cherries, one of my favourite fruits. Are you a cherry fan, Chris?
I certainly am, definitely. Flowering cherries, the ones we can enjoy for our wonderful displays in the spring, but actually the ones which really are the bee's knees, of course, the ones we eat.
The fruiting ones, definitely. So, just thinking about that, I was very fortunate to go to Japan, I would say 10 years ago. It's probably 15, and out there, I went at the start of the cherry flowering season, and they have these amazing parks which are just covered in cherry trees. And the bloom is amazing. But what I never really thought about until we started putting this show together was, are they the ones that have these amazing flowers? Are they going to give you amazing fruits as well, or what's the differences between them?
Yeah, I mean, they both belong to the Prunus family, but sadly, the ones we grow for ornamental use generally are just that. They might set a fruit, but their fruits are probably fairly bitter, sour, fairly insignificant. So the name varieties of cherries we're familiar with, like Prunus Kanzan or Sherifugan, or the winter autumn flowering cherry, which obviously we sell a lot of at the garden centre here. All those tend to be specifically for their wonderful flower or their good foliage. Some have fantastic autumn colour. Some have stunning bark colour as well.
Yep.
So they are quite specific and quite different to the ones
the fruiting ones.
Yeah.
Okay, and forgive my ignorance, but just thinking, when I used to work in mail order, you've got is it Mirabellum plum?
Mirabellum plum, yes,
and
indeed.
the bird cherry.
Yeah.
Now, they're both cherries, aren't they?
They are. They produce flowers, quite spectacular flowers, actually, and they do produce fruits.
So are they related to the cropping varieties, or
the gene pool would be from the Prunus cerasiferum, which is the cherry plum. That's where the gene line probably comes into a lot of the varieties we enjoy today as fruiting cherries.
Okay, so that's the sweeter one.
The sweeter one,
it?
yes.
And then, because again, just thinking back to Japan, they have, I'm going to say, almost sour cherries out there. They're more like a small plum, sort of damson size.
So that would be the avium. So that's the wild cherry, what we would call the wild cherry, or the bird cherry. So much smaller leaves, but very decorative. Very, and has a really good use in our gardens, i.e., as an individual tree, or maybe mixed in with a hedge line.
Yeah, because am I right in thinking that cherries flower before quickthorns?
Yes, so the cherry you tend to see in flower right at the beginning of the season. It's a question we get asked at the garden centre here: is what's that tree?
That beautiful
tree? And that is one of the cherries, one of the Cerasiferum forms, which of course they do flower, and that's the Cericifolia is the variety or the species, and that one often is tagged to other parts and names. I think there's one called Spring Glow or Spring Glory. So that's a name variety of that one, which flowers right at the start of the season.
Okay.
Much before the popular varieties like Kanzan and Anamagawa, the cherry pole cherry are looking good. So it really does kickstart, and then we have to wait for the quickthorn and obviously the blackthorn to do their thing a few weeks later. Yeah.
Because cherries are clearly a massive family of trees, aren't they? And like you say, you get the ornamental ones, and then you get the fruiting ones, which we're now very fortunate to have a proper local expert on growing cherries on our chat today, aren't we, Chris?
We are indeed, yes. So we'll be chatting cherries from the sort of commercial growing of them, but I think with our guest, we're going to learn an awful lot about growing them in our own gardens as well. Horwood cherries are based in Great Horwood in Buckinghamshire, just a stone's throw from the garden centre. We've been lucky enough to stock their delicious fruits over the past couple of years. However, this year they've branched out into Pick Your Own. So we are delighted today on our podcast talk to Vicky Grange from Horwood Cherries. Hello, Vicky, and welcome to Dig It.
Thank you. Hi.
So I suppose the first question we really want to ask, having visited your wonderful nursery there, is how did you become a cherry grower?
Well, So I met my now husband, and on one of our first dates, we were talking about fruit, and I think he had recently had some cherries, bought some cherries from a grower in Kent. So not via the supermarket, but kind of from a stall near the grower. So they were very, very fresh, and just talking about how I couldn't believe how delicious they were, and they were grown in Kent. And it kind of planted a bit of a seed, and I went away, and I just bizarrely obviously had too much time on my hands at the time, was thinking about cherries, did some research, and realised that Buckinghamshire used to be really well known for its cherries, particularly South Bucks. And then kind of had a mess up again and talking about cherries again, and decided that we might be onto something here. How about planting a commercial cherry orchard? And it kind of just went from there, really. I went away again, did some market research, and then said, right, David, let's do this. Let's put a business together, 50 partnership, 50-50, and so we did, and that was it, really. So it was literally just a little conversation that led to us planting 2,500 cherry trees.
Wow, that's a lot of cherry trees, isn't it? And
Did you have
to buy a sort of farm to start off with, or
no?
How did it start off?
So we're in Great Horwood, and my now father-in-law, he very kindly let us plant our cherry trees on a hectare of his land that has always been part of a livestock farm. So it's land that was already within my husband's family, and so we kind of took a hectare, and that was where we were going to plant the trees.
So a hectare, I'm not very good with sizes. Is it 5 acres or 2.5 acres?
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and how many trees did you start off with?
2,500.
You can get that many on. Wow.
Gosh.
I thought 2,500 would take sort of 20 acres or something. That's wow.
We decided to. So once we'd decided that we were going to plant a cherry orchard, we spent a long time. It wasn't a rash decision. Right, we're going to plant a cherry orchard. Let's order the trees. It was over a few years. We spent a lot of time visiting some established growers who are, second, third generation fruit growers, both in Herefordshire and Kent. So it wasn't. Although the idea kind of came about over a little conversation, the actual planting was very well thought out. We took a lot of advice. I spent a lot of time shadowing growers, 2 growers in particular, who were very kind, and I still speak to them regularly, or send them a picture of a leaf with a funny mark on if I can't identify what that mark is. And we bought the trees, 2,500 of them back in 2015.
Wow.
And would you mind sharing with us what varieties you planted, or was it just one variety?
So we've got 5 different varieties. So we decided that we were going to plant them in quite an intensive way on that hectare. And we first identified that we wanted to span about 5 weeks of the season. So that immediately, not limited, but narrowed down the choice of varieties. So I think we started off with a variety called Merchant, and Merchant is is self-sterile, so it needs another tree of another variety to pollinate in order to grow. So that then led us on to the next variety, which is Belize. And then we wanted another variety that came in after Belize, and that was Cordia. So then we had to look to see which variety would pollinate Cordia, and that was Regina. And then our 5th and final variety is Lapin, and that's our only self-fertile variety. And it's a really popular variety, Lapin. It crops really heavily. It's resistant to many pests and diseases, supposedly. So we thought, right, okay, well, let's put, a third of the orchard we'll plant as Lapin, and that'll be a bit of our fail-safe variety, because the others are a little bit more sensitive.
So growing cherries commercially, I was very fortunate to have a walk around the cherry farm the other week, and what got me was the fact that Yeah, they are very intensive. They're planted quite close together, aren't they, Vicky?
They are. We planted the trees at approximately 1.65 meters apart, and the rows are 2.5 meters apart. So we planted them on a trellis system. What we wanted to do was a particular growing system called UFO, which is upright fruiting offshoots. And what that does is it just creates a fruiting wall. So as Chris saw, the trees are planted at a 45-degree angle, and our first wire is approximately 50 centimetres from the ground. So if you imagine the trees planted at 45 degrees, and then the leader, so the main trunk, as it were, of the tree, is then bent down, so it's horizontal to the ground at 50 centimetres above the ground. You then get the laterals, which become the verticals, that come upwards.
So almost like laying a hedge.
Yeah.
I thought it's very similar to the way you grow a step-over apple, but with a step-over you let him grow at that, they usually grow sort of horizontal, and then you allow the little laterals then to fruit. In this instance, you're letting the main laterals, probably thinned out, I'm sure, to produce the main sort of growing stem of the cherry tree. Yeah. Yeah,
that's exactly it. And and from that point of view, it was really interesting because my husband and I were both completely new into this. David, many years ago, had a pick your own strawberry, but had never had anything to do with cherries. I'd never had anything to do with cherries. So it really has been a huge learning curve. So we wanted to plant in this particular way, UFO, upright fruiting offshoots. It's very intensive. You can get a large crop of a relatively small area, although when you're pruning 2.5 acres doesn't feel very small. But what we've learned actually is some of the varieties aren't really that keen to grow like that. So the lapins, which are only self-fertile, are very vigorous and they really like to grow like that. Whereas some of the other varieties, and Chris might have seen when he came in, they've got slightly longer branches. They prefer to grow and fruit off longer, floppier branches. So I have a bit of a play when I'm pruning and just see really what suits the tree the best. So, what we're going to get the best fruit from, really. So we started off with UFO, but now we've got various versions of it going on throughout the orchard.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I did think of is when I was looking at the way you're growing the plants, Vicky, that, surely that's some sort of method, the amateur gardener could have a go at, to use their space wisely. Would that be something you should have a think of doing?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think especially, if you've got children, grandchildren, the way our trees are planted is the fruit is accessible, or somebody in a wheelchair, the fruit is accessible to everybody. So I think if you've got a wall, or you can put a bit of fencing up, or even just some wires, and can train your fruit tree, you can just, have a play with it, I suppose, and see what happens. Nothing's forever, is it? If it's not working the way it is, you could perhaps just let it undo it and let it grow up again.
Indeed, and able to keep those pesky birds off as well. So,
just thinking, how tall do the shoots get? Are you letting them sort of come up to about 3, 4, 5 foot, or do they get taller than that?
As tall as I can prune. So I'm quite tall anyway.
Okay.
But what I don't want is the fruit to be unharvestable from the ground. So so I don't let them go. The tallest ones are probably about 7.5 feet.
Wow, that's really compact, isn't it? It sounds like a really sensible way of training the trees so you can harvest all the crop. That's brilliant. So, Vicky, do you grow your trees outside, or do you have to sort of protect them from the birds at all?
So we have our orchard covered. So post-blossom, so before the trees come into bloom, they're all open in the outside. And then after blossom, we cover them. The covers are made out of plastic and netting. So we've got netting, kind of, if you imagine 31 rows. Between each of those cherry tree rows, there's a grass alleyway. And above that grass alleyway, we have netting. So that keeps birds out, but it allows the rainwater to come through, so we can utilise the rainwater to irrigate the plants. And then attached to that netting over the cherry tree rows are plastic, big plastic sheets. And they are mainly to stop the rain, because cherries are really susceptible to splitting if they get too wet. Two reasons.
Okay.
One water landing where the stem and the cherry meet, and the water kind of pools in there. The cherry absorbs it and then it splits. And two, too much water uptake from the roots as well. So we have got a system really that helps with the splitting, but also keeps the birds out. Now, birds are really clever. I have lots that taunt me every morning and every evening, but we've got a lot of cherries. Yeah, and they don't do significant damage, so we're happy to share a bit.
I suppose if you've got 2,500 trees, they probably get quite full quite quickly. Whereas with my one single cherry tree, they just mob it, and that's it. I was saying to Chris the other day, I had a whole grand total of 12 cherries off my tree. As my entire crop for the year.
Pick your own orchard close by.
Definitely, yeah.
They do. 2 years ago in 2020, we couldn't put the covers on because we couldn't get a team together, and it takes more than just myself and David to put the covers on. So we did leave the covers off, which was a great learning curve, and they really do split, which we found out. But also the starlings, I feel like we did our bit for starling conservation, because it was like something out of a horror movie. They would literally, on our neighbour's house, they would be on the tree there, and they would just fly down. I can't even tell you how many hundreds of them. It was an amazing sight. But they did do a bit more damage.
Yeah. I'm sure Alfred Hitchcock would be proud of you for doing that. Yes,
absolutely.
And just thinking about, so how long does it take from planting to actually cropping the fruit? Do you have to, using your UFO method, does that speed the process up, or?
I don't know that it necessarily speeds the process up. So cherries fruit off their second year's growth. We planted in 2015, and we planted 2-year-old whips. So they went into the ground in 2015. We had a very small harvest in 2017, which has increased year on year. And this year, 7? It takes about 6-7 years, I think, for the trees really to kind of mature and grow into themselves, as it were. So this would be probably our first year of having mature cherry trees.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And do you know what the sort of lifespan of the cherry tree is? Will you expect a good crop off it for the next 20 years, or is it something that's going to last even longer than that?
15 to 20 for a commercial orchard, probably 15 for a big commercial orchard. But I mean, they should still be cropping by the time they're 25. So yes, we've got a little while ahead of us yet.
Brilliant.
And Vicky, you, as we know, as we sell cherry trees at the garden centre here, bare rooted, they're grafted stock. So does that sort of play quite an important part when you were planting back in 2015 of the variety, the grafting variety you were purchasing your 5 varieties on?
Yes, so we purchased them all from a big nursery, and we took advice from, I said earlier about some growers who I've spent some time shadowing. And so we went for the Gazella 5 and 6 rootstock, which is a dwarfing rootstock.
Makes sense.
Again, the 8-9 feet maximum would be the height that they grow. We obviously prune them at around 7 feet. Again, just, harvesting from the ground, not having to worry about ladders, making it accessible to all, and also within the structure, because the whole orchard is covered, we obviously wanted to make sure that they weren't going to outgrow the structure. So we went for Gazella 5 and 6. Yeah,
that's Gisellas. We do. I think the Morello cherry. I think it's only that variety we do at the garden centre here on that, and it's obviously very, very popular for that reason for those people with smaller gardens and smaller spaces to fill.
Yeah, and I think actually my mum bought years ago the Morello on a G5 or 6 from you as well, and she has that trained against a wall, and it's lovely. It's really nice just to keep that method as well. But
great stuff. Yeah, that's good.
And you mentioned that Buckinghamshire once upon a time was famous for growing cherries. Is that because of our soil? Do we need a specific soil to grow cherries in, or will they grow anywhere?
No, you definitely need a specific soil. Heavy North Bucks clay isn't the most ideal soil.
Surprise.
I'm pleased to hear you've got the special soil as well. Yeah.
We've worked with what we've got. I think they were more prolific in South Bucks and the Chilterns, where the soil's a bit more free draining.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I know around,
chalky.
I think it was Sear Green area, they used to have on Sundays, the last Sunday of harvest. I can't remember what they called it now. It'll come to me in a minute. The last Sunday of harvest, they used to get together. I think they even called it Cherry Pie Sunday, and it was a big annual event. Where we are, because we had our soil analysed and everything before we planted, we wanted to make sure of what we had. pH-wise, it was pretty good. It's about 6.5. So ideally, cherries want between 6 and 6.5.
Right.
pH, just because the majority of trace elements are kind of more available there than they are if it goes, much less or much more. We planted on raised beds as well, so it's just enabled it to be a bit more free draining. We've composted on top just to try and help the movement of the soil a little bit, try and increase the organic matter as well to help with drainage.
Yep.
And we, so that's kind of the soil. Lighter, more free draining soil is preferable. They're a bit sensitive. They don't like wet feet. They don't like too dry.
I think that sort of rule sort of applies to all the stone fruits, wouldn't it, Vicky? Would you say? Have you grown the fast draining aspect? Certainly.
We've just literally planted just a little, not commercial orchard, just a few, a handful of other stone fruit trees, and again just worked in some compost and just tried to help them out a little bit really.
And feeding wise, do you have any sort of regimes you sort of annual things you carry out to keep your cherries in fine fettle through the season, or is it all done sort of at the beginning of the season when the trees are dormant?
Well, I've got a kind of trickle irrigation, and I've got a dosatron where I can dissolve some fertilizer, into water, and the dosatron sucks it up, and that way I can monitor exactly how much is being put on which variety. So throughout the season, I do various things, but most of it is through the trickle rather than any kind of top dressings. For a number of reasons. One, cost. Cost of fertilizer now is astronomical. So what do we put on? We put some potassium on for fruit size, some phosphates. They're particularly good for the root development, and nitrogen as well. So nitrogen in the spring really helps for the leaf size, which obviously increases the surface area and therefore better photosynthesis. And then in the autumn, some more nitrogen as well, just to help with the bud development for the following year.
Okay.
There are some foliar feeds as well that can go on sporadically throughout the season as well if we feel like we need to put something on. We'll send some leaves off. We'll send a few of the leaves off for analysis as well, just to see if the trees are lacking. But it's hard. But I do feel as well. They're going to grow. They're going to grow. I don't want to be putting too much on the trees. I want to give enough to give them a helping hand, but it's not going to be economically viable or particularly great for the environment to be constantly feeding them, in my opinion. But there we go. We'll see how long the orchard goes for with that. But I think it's just a bit of getting the balance right, really, giving them a helping hand, but not
overfeeding.
Not overfeeding.
That's interesting. And just going back, you were talking about the birds and harvesting. Just thinking about that a bit more. Is it possible to pick your cherries while they're still sort of yellow and haven't properly coloured up yet? And get them to ripen in the fridge, or do you have to pick them when they are ready to eat?
You've got to pick them when they're ready to eat. They won't ripen. Once they're off the tree, or that they will just start deteriorating. So they don't. It's not like a banana where you can pick it early and it'll ripen on transit. So the cherries, it really is. That's why it's very fast and furious during the season. They've got to be off that tree. When we're picking for the shops, hotels and restaurants, They're off the tree. We don't touch the fruit at all. We pick from the stem, grade it by hand. First grades, they're the ones that are going out. Second grades, they go for jam. And third grades are, there's a local chap with a pig farmer, and he takes any waste cherries for his pigs. So they do kind of need to be picked when they're ready. And there's 3 ways that I decide if they're ripe or not. The first one is there's a universal colour chart called CTIFL, which you can only get from France. It's literally a little chart with different colours on, and it depends on the variety to the colour. So it will tell you on the back. It's all very straightforward. It'll tell you on the back, Belize colour 5, 6. So you look at 5 and 6, hold the cherry up to it, decide whether or not it's at that stage yet. And then the next one is the Brix level, the sugar level. So I use a refractometer to test the sugar level. So I'll take a random sample. And the third is taste. If it tastes sweet, if it's dark around the stone, when you bite into it, then it's good to go.
And when you're picking them, you're not touching the fruit. So are you trimming the stalks with like snips, or are you? How do you go about harvesting?
So you walk up to the tree, see a cherry that meets kind of the requirements colour-wise, and you place your thumb and forefinger near the top of the stem where the stem is attached to the branch, and you just literally lift your wrist up, and the stem should come away easily from the branch. So you're holding the fruit by the stem, glancing over it, checking to see which grade it is, and then just placing it gently in the correct container.
Wow. Yeah. So that's how you don't. Your fruit never turns up all bruised, which you've obviously mastered this, haven't you?
It is. They are. I said it earlier, but they are so sensitive, and I think that's one of our USPs is that the fruit from raw cherries is obviously there is human error, but as much as we can, 99.9% of the time, it's out in tip-top conditions, straight from the tree.
I have to say, Vicky, when I was there doing some picking, that process takes a little bit of getting used to, though, because you almost feel as though you need to sort of maybe pull the stem, but as you say, if you get the angle just right, it does part from the tree really easily.
It does. It normally takes, so if we have people kind of employed to help with harvest, it normally takes 2 to 3 days to really kind of get up to scratch with it, to learn the method and to feel kind of confident in doing it at speed.
Yeah. One thing I did notice, Vicky, when I was walking around, there was some intriguing looking pots sort of set amongst your wonderful rows of cherries. Am I thinking that this is something to do with pest control?
No, you're absolutely right. So there's a couple of different pests that are definitely not ones that we're wanting. One of them is called SWD, which is a spotted winged Drosophila. So it's a fruit fly, and the male has a spot on each of his wings. So they're quite easy to identify from that point of view. The female's a bit more tricky to identify, but you can with an eyeglass. And if you know what you're looking for, it's got a pointed ovipositor. But yeah, those yellow traps, they are particularly for that fruit fly, really, just to monitor to see if we have, and if we did have, kind of in what numbers. And what it is we fill it up. They're up all year round because this particular fruit fly likes to overwinter in nearby hedgerows. So we put those up all year round, and every week in the season, every 2 weeks out of the season, I go round, I open the traps, pour out the contents, use my eyeglass, have a little look to see if there is any of those SWD in there, and then fill the lure up again, or fill it up with lure again to try and see if there are any more the following week. But as well as those traps, I don't know if you noticed the netting all around the orchard. It's a particular type of netting with the holes small enough that the SWD can't fly through it, because SWD is supposed to only fly up to approximately 1.5 meters high. So we do, the traps to monitor, the netting to keep it out, and also any fruit that's dropped on the floor or left in the left on the trees, fruit that starts to mummify or something over the winter, it all gets picked off. So at the end of the season, if you were to come into the orchard, you shouldn't be able to find a single cherry in there. That's the aim. So it's just all prevention, really. Prevention rather than cure is what we're aiming for.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
So I better go and clean up all the stones that the birds left behind. Are they going to cause me problems next year?
The stones are okay. Any bits of flesh is what you don't want.
But
the stones are fine. But this SWD, it's in raspberries, blueberries, blackberries, all sorts of things. So yeah,
so
just good practice really to use it all.
Excellent. And are there any other diseases or things we need to be aware of when growing cherries?
What else do we need to be aware of? Well, I think aphids everywhere. They don't really harm the fruit, but they don't, they're a bit unsightly on the leaf once it's all curled up. With cherries, they like to be quite open. I mean, I need to get into a bit more pruning, but they like to be quite open, not too close together, all the branches. And then that, just allow the airflow to come through, and that would help with any kind of botrytis or other type of mildew type diseases. Yep.
I suppose actually on the subject of pruning, do you do most of your pruning sort of the latter end of the season, or when's your main pruning time for your trees?
My main pruning time's in spring. With cherries again, they don't like to. Well, you shouldn't prune cherry trees if it's going to be wet. You want it to be dry for at least 3 days so that the cuts you make dry completely. Otherwise, you open them up to risk of canker and other diseases. So when we prune, I disinfect my secateurs after each tree, just in case one tree is carrying something that that I can't see, and moves on to the next one. So I disinfect secateurs after every tree, and I tend to prune in spring just because its covers are going up if they're not up already. And just some dry days really.
So spring, March, April?
Ideally I'd like to start in March. Sometimes by the time I get round to it, it's more April, May. Once we finish harvest this year, if I can leave the covers up, I will take a bit more out, because now I can see how much fruit we've got on this year. There's a few trees that I just want to give a bit more space to, so I'll be able to take out some big branches, some big uprights, just to allow more airflow. So it's kind of a continual process, but definitely not in any wet weather.
No. Excellent.
And now onto the favourite thing, the eating part. Can you give us any sort of recommendations for good recipes or what to do with our cherries?
What could you do with them? So my father-in-law does a great recipe. Well, it's not even a recipe. He destones them, destems them, drops them in brandy, leaves them there for said period of time, and then before Christmas he'll decant them and pop them in ice cube trays and cover them with chocolate. And that's lovely, and it's a really nice kind of Christmas present that he gives out to his friends, and they taste delicious. I tend to, because the season's quite hectic, I don't have that much time to make much with my cherries, unfortunately. So I tend to just destone them, destem them, simmer them up, mash them a bit with a potato masher, let them cool, and then pop them in a freezer bag. And then during winter, we'll have them mixed with porridge or in yogurt, or it makes a good base for a crumble as well.
That sounds good.
My mum makes a to die for cherry ice cream. So they're just so versatile. The roasted with lamb apparently is very nice.
Okay. Would that be the sweet cherry or a sour cherry?
Yeah, sweet cherry. Sweet cherry. A friend of mine, she roasts them. She put them with a lamb. She's also put them with goat's cheese on a bruschetta and served that up at a dinner party. So they're very versatile, I think, not just as a dessert cherry, but as to have with your main meal.
Brilliant. I love lamb, and as we've got some of your cherries in the fridge, I might have to go and buy some and have roast lamb this weekend. Yeah, definitely. That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
And Vicky, sort of thinking ahead now, with your business at Great Horwood, where do you think you're going to be in the next few years? Have you got any plans to grow more cherries, or maybe do a bit of diversification in other fruits? Do you have a bit of a master plan?
At the moment, I'm going to just stick with the cherries we've got. I've got some ideas of some different ways of planting. There's a particular method called the Drapo method, which I quite like the sound of. So where we've got a few gaps, as you do, there's always a certain percentage of trees that don't make it for whatever reason. So I think the next step really would be to plant a few more within the orchard that we've got already, not to expand size-wise, and just have a play with different methods. I find it intriguing how different varieties are suited to different training and pruning methods. So no, we're going to stick with cherries, stick with the size we've got, and just play around. I think there's always room for improvement. I'm always learning. Every year, every season, there's something else that another challenge that comes up that you didn't really have to face before. So there's a lot going on, and I think we'll just stick with how it is for now.
Brilliant. And just thinking, you're talking about opening trees up earlier, and is there, obviously you've got a fairly clever way of growing your trees. For the normal gardener, would you recommend that, or would you suggest the standard sort of, I don't know, what would you call it, a pom-pom sort of type shape, or any other shapes that you think the normal gardener who wants to grow a cherry tree?
I think it depends on what you're after. I mean, in the garden with children or grandchildren, if they want to be climbing up in them, then probably a more traditional way of growing it would be good, because it's fun to climb trees, and if you can climb a tree and get a reward of a nice delicious cherry once you've got up there, then all the better. But there's a chap called Greg Lang from United States of America. I'm sure he's American. Yes, I'm sure he's American. He has done so much research on different varieties. I mean, he's got a book with different training methods. He's got a book, and there are vast numbers. So I think it's fun to have a play. I mean, some ornamental growers, or not ornamental growers, but when you're in a kind of a stately home garden, you're looking around and how beautiful some of the pear trees and apple trees are grown when they're grown on a trellis system. I just think it's fun to play. I think it depends. You're going to get fruit out of it, so just got to work out how high you want the fruit, how accessible, what space you've got. Don't forget to plant one that's going to fertilise the other one. So make sure you haven't bought, a self-sterile tree, because you're never going to get fruit. And apart from that, just work out what it is you're aiming for.
Okay, thank you.
And thinking about that, Vicky, what is there any sort of one piece of advice you give to our listeners about growing cherries in the garden? From your vast experience over growing them over the last sort of 7 years over at Great Hawkwood.
Every year they'll give you a different challenge, so they're certainly not boring, easy fruit to grow. Probably just make sure that they've got some decent, well-draining soil. Don't overwater them. Don't let them dry out too much. But I think their root system, that's the most important thing. Just making sure that it is free draining.
And growing cherries in pots, is that something you've experimented at all? I mean, obviously on your orchard you don't need to do that. Yeah.
No, I haven't. I suppose from that point of view, it's just making sure that the pot would be big enough for the root system that you've got. But I mean, plenty of people do grow them in pots. But it's not something that it's not something that you're probably better equipped to deal with those questions.
And what's the question nobody ever asks you, but you really wish they would?
Question nobody asks me. Probably. It's very random, but nobody ever asks you what your favourite smell is. And my favourite smell is just before it rains. So the smell of rain on freshly cut grass or whatever, that is lovely. But my favourite smell is that moment before it starts to rain. And I think there's a special name for it.
Pétrichor.
Is that what it is?
I think it is.
It is,
yes.
It's somebody that can smell the rain before it happens, not after it happens, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's very strange, but I've always loved the rain. Yeah, my favourite smell is that moment when you're outside and it hasn't rained yet, but it's just about to.
And that'd be very pertinent with growing cherries, I suppose, wouldn't it? if you hadn't covered them up at all. Go like that. Vicky, we do like to ask all our dear guests the usual perennial question of, you've been shipwrecked on a desert island. Which plants would you wish that you could have with you to enjoy on your desert island?
So my favourite of all time flower is a sunflower. So it would have to be a sunflower, particularly a giant Mongolian sunflower. My mum grew about 500 sunflowers, 12 different varieties for David and my wedding, and they're just sunflowers. There's just something about them. They're just beautiful, and they're happy. They make you smile, and then they've got the added bonus. Obviously, I could eat the seeds.
Indeed.
When they're
That's
over.
great.
So yeah, all-time favourite would have to be a sunflower.
Yeah, good choice. Yeah,
fantastic. And you could make some nice oils out of it to cook on as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Enjoy.
So all that fish that's going to be caught as well. I hadn't thought of that. See, it's just the flower that keeps on giving.
And of course, sunflower stems, they produce canes, don't they? So you could use those for support systems as well. It's a multitasking plant.
So I could build a shelter.
You could, yes. There you go.
Fantastic. That's good. Oh, well, thank you very much for your time today, Vicky. It's been fascinating talking to you, and it really inspired me to try some new things with cherries.
Yeah, and indeed.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been great to speak with you.
And it's been great to find out the process is growing them commercially as well. And some of the advice you've given has been absolutely invaluable today, Vicky. So thank you very much. And we look forward to welcoming more wonderful Great Horwood cherries to the garden centre shortly.
Eating some more.
Yes, it'll be the new variety next week, so they'll be in.
Oh, that sounds great. Thank you very much, Vicky. Thanks for your time.
Thanks very much. Thanks.
Wow. I never knew we were going to have such an interesting chat about cherries.
I know.
Brilliant.
From my perceptions of growing a cherry tree in the garden, or trying to grow a cherry tree in the garden over these years, to the way they're grown commercially, lots of food for thought, I would say.
Yeah, what a brilliant way of sort of growing them, almost like laying them over sideways, and then I suppose that gives them a nice long trunk, effectively, and then all the branches come up the side, and then do they become leaders? I mean,
they would be individual leaders. So on each tree, you're probably getting anything between 5 and maybe up to 8 leaders per tree, and they were 1.5, 1.6 meters apart. So yes, you get a lot of productivity in a
very compact area, which is, I guess, how she's managed to get 2,500 of them in a couple of acres. That's brilliant, isn't it?
Yeah, and certainly when it came to picking, when I was there, a few weeks ago, Peter, it was easy. It's so easy to actually get to the tree and pick, and pick well.
And I suppose equally, the trouble with the one down on my allotment is it's now, I'd say, about 8 foot tall, and it's growing in all directions, and yeah, I gave up netting it a couple of years ago because it just became so hard. Whereas if you've got something that's compact and nice and easy and in a uniform shape like that, I expect it's a lot easier, isn't it?
And also very narrow. That was the thing, when you're walking up the rows, you could, probably a metre in depth, which of course you could easily net in your own garden as well. Hence, that's why I suppose at the garden centre here, we obviously sell lots of fan-train fruit, because it lends itself to growing against a fence or a wall or a division within the garden as well.
And I suppose if you get a maiden, you can probably save yourself a few pounds by doing one of these fancy growing systems and end up with a lovely looking tree against your wall that's genuinely sort of grown up to the wall.
Most definitely, Peter. And I think that's the thing with a maiden tree. It's basically your building blocks, or whatever you do with that maiden tree, whether you stop it after 3 or 4 foot to become a bush, or you let it get taller to become a pom-pom sort of half standard. You've got that flexibility. But no, I think using a maiden tree as effectively this form of step over, where you're growing it on a more compact system, surely is the way to go, with spaces in our gardens becoming even more limited these days.
I'm just thinking on that, Chris. Am I right in thinking that the cherries you can grow on a north-facing wall? Is it there was a fruiting one, wasn't
There
there?
is, yes. So the famous one, and that's Morello. So the Morello cherry.
That's a slightly sour one, isn't it?
It is, yes. It's one we sell lots of at the garden centre. A lot of people obviously like it for producing jams and preserves and cooking with. But yes, so if our listeners are trying to think about something to grow against a north or an east-facing wall, pear trees will grow reasonably well, but actually the Morello cherry by far will do much, much better.
And the other thing that I'd never really thought about was sort of cropping seasons, because obviously in this country we've got some agri-businesses that have farms down in Cornwall and then farms in Cambridge and then farms in sort of a bit further up north, and then they go up to Scotland and gives them a much longer cropping season. The other way you can do that is just with different varieties of fruit, and I'm guessing with the 5 varieties that Vicky's chosen, that's enabled her to do that. And can you think of sort of some other varieties that you can do that with?
Indeed. Well, certainly from the varieties we sell through the garden centre here, through our mail order department, we have picked out those 4 key varieties to give you quite a long extended season. So Sunburst would be the one to start your season in early July. So that's another. Again, it's a dessert cherry. So pick off the tree and enjoy. Raised in Canada, and then the next one to follow on that from that would be Stella, which is your favourite.
Yeah, that's the one that I can never get to crop, and
it just
looks nice, but it doesn't do much for me.
Well, maybe
I need to look after it and give it some fertiliser and water and
the basic things in life, perhaps. Yeah, and then we've got Summer Sun, which is the one which is late July into August as well. So that's another very sweet dessert variety. And then of course you've got Morello, which again is sort of late July into August too. So within those 4 varieties, you've got probably two months, maybe a little bit longer.
Wow.
So, of
and I suppose the other thing you must be aware of with cherries is that they're not all self-pollinated, are they? You've got to be fairly clever with what you're going to plant next to them so you can get them pollinating.
Certainly, and that's in case of a point really. If you're growing them, if you've got the space and you can create your own little cherry orchard, then yes, grow probably the one plant of several varieties to give you that succession. And obviously choosing some of the varieties we sell here, you would find that would be quite easy to do. A lot of them are pollinated obviously by our favourite bees, and obviously some wind pollination as well. Hence, thinking about how we grow our sweet corn, we tend to grow that in blocks. Cherry trees tend to be grown in blocks when they're grown in an orchard. Obviously, if you're growing them down the line, obviously, which Vicky does under a structure, she makes sure that there's 4 or 5 varieties to give that succession. Remember, the plants will obviously flower at around about the same time. It's how those developing fruits form, which obviously gives you your different cropping seasons. So essentially, that little bit of a lap over of time will give you that succession of crops, which of course is so important.
Gives you an extended season, doesn't it? So before you went to the cherry farm, Chris, did you come across this idea of picking the stalks off the branches rather than just pull the cherries off the stalks? And I thought that was the right way.
To be perfectly honest, Peter, I was expecting to get a small pair of secateurs or scissors to get the scissors off, because that's how I expected to remove them, because I always felt with cherries, because they're quite a precious, easily bruised fruit, that you want to do it as easy as possible. So Vicky does give you a bit of a crash course when you get there on how to remove the fruits from the plant successfully and succinctly without obviously damaging the plant.
Yeah, because the idea of pulling the stalks off the branches, I'd never come across I've never done cherry picking commercially, or I just always thought, that's a nice looking cherry, it's a lovely colour, that must be right. Pull it, and if it comes off the stalk, it's in my mouth.
It's easy as that. But I think the whole process is you put your fingers under the stems, should I say the stalks? And then you're obviously then lifting the stalks up to a point where they do hopefully part from the tree. Some part better than others, and I think that's what Vicky was saying about the process of making sure that the fruit is to ripeness, that they do come away nice and easy.
So you don't even need to squash the cherry to test whether it's sort of nice and ripe or not. You pull the stalk, and if that it comes off nice and easily, then the fruit's ready. But then I think we're discussing earlier, weren't we, the fact that if you're leaving the stalk on the tree, that then just withers and potentially opens the tree up for an infection of some sort, I guess, is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's all part of the good garden husbandry, isn't it? Removing all that sort of potential dead material which could reinfect or create dieback or create mildew or botrytis within the plant itself. So, in as ways, you're pruning and removing those stalks for a good reason and keeping the plant nice and clean for the winter.
Like they say, Chris, every day's a school day.
They do indeed, Peter.
I'm really pleased to have learned that now. I might be able to harvest my cherries more successfully and keep them fresh for a couple of days rather than
and bruise-free as well.
Bruise-free, that's it, yeah. Here you go, Chris, I've got one for you. Okay. What happens when a cherry tree grows up?
Oh, tell me.
It blossoms.
Well, it does, indeed. So I'll try. Well, see if I can beat that one. So, Peter, did you hear the joke about the cherry?
No.
It was pitiful.
Brilliant. Okay, Chris, well, I think that should round up the show nicely. Thank you for all of your help and input as always.
Thank you, Peter. Today's show was brought to you by Buckingham Garden Centre and Nurseries. The show was hosted by Chris Day and Peter Brown. The show was produced by Peter Brown. And our thanks to Chiltern Music Therapy for providing the music. Thanks for listening.
At Chiltern Music Therapy, we want everyone to know the difference that music can make in their lives. From parents and their premature babies in hospital to grandparents with dementia. We provide music therapy and community music services to people of all ages and needs across England. We work both digitally and in person in people's homes, care homes, schools, hospitals and hospices. Find out more at chilternmusictherapy.co.uk.